Clara was only 7 years old when she first touched a piano. It happened in her grandmother's small apartment on the third floor of an old building where the elevator never worked, and the stairs creaked with every step. The piano sat in the corner of the living room, pushed against a wall with peeling wallpaper. It was an upright piano, dark brown with scratches on its legs and keys that had turned yellow from age. Her grandmother called it the old friend. She said she had bought it 40 years ago from a church that was closing down. Back then it was already old. Now it was ancient. Some of the keys stuck when you pressed them. The sound was not perfect, but to young Clara it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She remembered standing on her toes to reach the keys that first time. Her grandmother had smiled and lifted her onto the bench. Clara pressed one key, then another. The sounds filled the room and something inside her came alive. From that day on, she knew what she wanted to do with her life. Her family did not have much money. Her mother worked 2 jobs just to pay the rent. Her father had left when she was a baby, and no one talked about him. There was no money for piano lessons. There was no money for a piano of their own. But every weekend, Clara would take the bus across town to her grandmother's apartment. And every weekend, her grandmother would teach her everything she knew. Her grandmother had never been a professional pianist. She had learned to play as a young girl in a small village, taught by a neighbor who had once performed in concert halls before the war changed everything. But she knew enough. She knew how to read music. She knew how to feel the notes. And most importantly, she knew how to pass that feeling on to her granddaughter. Years passed. Clara practiced on that old piano every chance she got. She borrowed books from the library about music theory. She watched videos online of famous pianists and studied how their fingers moved. She could not afford the fancy training that other kids had. But she had something else. She had hunger. She had love for the music. And she had that old piano that seemed to understand her in ways that people sometimes did not. By the time she was 17, Clara had become good. Really good. Good enough that her high school music teacher noticed. Good enough that she entered a regional competition and won 2nd place, losing only to a boy who had been taking lessons since he was 4 and whose parents had bought him a grand piano worth more than Clara's mother made in a year. But 2nd place was enough. It was enough to get her noticed. It was enough to earn her a scholarship to the Hartwell Conservatory, one of the most respected music schools in the country. When the acceptance letter arrived, Clara's mother cried. Her grandmother cried. Clara cried too, though she tried to hide it. She thought her hard days were over. She thought that finally, after all those years of struggling, she had made it. She was wrong. The Hartwell Conservatory was like a different world. The buildings were old and beautiful, with tall windows and high ceilings. The practice rooms had perfect acoustics. The pianos were all new and perfectly tuned. The students wore expensive clothes and talked about their summer trips to Europe and the private teachers they had studied with since childhood. Clara felt out of place from the very first day. She did not have the right clothes. She did not have the right stories. When other students talked about their Steinway pianos at home, she stayed quiet. When they mentioned their teachers who had performed at Carnegie Hall, she had nothing to add. She was the scholarship girl, the one who did not belong. But she told herself it did not matter. She was here to learn. She was here to play. The rest was just noise. The conservatory held an annual showcase every spring. It was the biggest event of the year. Students performed in front of donors, faculty members, and talent scouts from famous music schools and orchestras around the world. A good performance could open doors. A great performance could change a life. Clara worked hard all year, waiting for her chance. She practiced for hours every day. She studied her pieces until she knew every note by heart. She was ready. But 2 weeks before the showcase, there was a problem. The main auditorium had a scheduling conflict. Some important event had been booked on the same night. and no one had noticed until it was too late. The conservatory scrambled to find a solution. They decided to split the showcase into two venues. The main students, the ones from wealthy families, the ones the school wanted to impress the donors with, would perform at the new concert hall on the East Campus. The others would perform at the Belmont Theater downtown. The Belmont Theater had once been a grand place. 50 years ago, famous musicians had performed there, but those days were long gone. The theater had been neglected for decades. The seats were worn, the curtains were faded, and the piano on stage was a 1920s grand that had not been properly cared for in years. When the assignments were posted, Clara saw her name under the Belmont list. She was not surprised. Scholarship students rarely got the best opportunities. She took a bus downtown the next day to see the theater for herself. The building looked tired from the outside. Paint was peeling near the entrance. The doors creaked when she pushed them open. Inside, the lobby smelled like dust and old wood. She walked down the aisle toward the stage. Her footsteps echoed in the empty space. And there it was, the piano. It was a grand piano, yes, but it had clearly seen better days. The black finish was dull and scratched. The bench was worn thin in the middle. When Clara lifted the lid and looked at the keys, she saw that some of them had small chips on the edges. She sat down and pressed a key. The sound that came out was not clean. It was not bright. It had a roughness to it, a character that new pianos did not have. Other students from the Belmont list started arriving over the next few days. One by one, they took a look at the piano and shook their heads. They complained to the professors. They wrote emails to the administration. Within a week, most of them had managed to get transferred back to the main campus showcase. They would share time slots. They would perform shorter pieces. Anything to avoid that old piano. The professors expected Clara to do the same. One of them even called her into his office. He was a tall man with gray hair and glasses that he always pushed up his nose when he was thinking. "Listen," he said, leaning back in his chair. "There is no shame in waiting until next year. That piano at Belmont is not suitable for a real performance. You will be at a disadvantage. The sound will not carry properly. The scouts will not be impressed." Clara listened politely. She thanked him for his concern. Then she told him she was staying. The professor looked at her like she had lost her mind. Maybe she had. But when Clara had sat at that old piano and pressed those imperfect keys, she had felt something familiar. She had felt the same thing she felt every time she played her grandmother's old upright. She felt like the piano was waiting for someone to understand it, waiting for someone to give it a chance. Everyone else saw a broken instrument. Clara saw an old friend. She would not abandon it. Not now. Not when they had just found each other. News travels fast in a small community, and the Hartwell Conservatory, for all its grand buildings and famous reputation, was a small community. By the end of the week, everyone knew about Clara. They called her the girl who chose the broken piano. At first, people just whispered. Clara would walk into a practice room and the conversation would suddenly stop. She would sit in the cafeteria and she could feel eyes on her back. She pretended not to notice. She told herself it did not matter. But it did. Of course it did. Then the whispers turned into something louder. One afternoon, Clara was walking through the main hall when she passed a group of students from the advanced program. They were standing near the bulletin board where the showcase assignments were still posted. One of them, a young man with perfect posture and an expensive watch on his wrist, was pointing at the Belmont Theater list and laughing. He was one of the best pianists at the school. Everyone knew his name. His family had donated a new wing to the library 2 years ago. He had already been accepted to one of the top music programs in New York. He was the kind of person who had never been told no in his entire life. When he saw Clara approaching, he did not lower his voice. If anything, he spoke louder. "Can you believe it?" he said to his friends, shaking his head. "She actually wants to perform on that thing. It is not even a real piano anymore. It is a piece of furniture. My grandmother has a better instrument in her basement, and she does not even play." His friends laughed. One of them made a joke about how Clara should just bring a toy keyboard instead. Another suggested she play with oven mitts on, since it would not make a difference anyway. Clara kept walking. She did not stop. She did not respond. She kept her eyes straight ahead and her face calm. But inside, her chest was tight. Her hands were shaking slightly. She had dealt with people like this before. She knew how to survive it. But that did not mean it did not hurt. The comments continued over the following days. Someone left a note on her practice room door that said, "Good luck with your antique." Another person asked her, in front of a whole group, if she was performing at Belmont because she felt sorry for the piano. Everyone laughed. Clara smiled politely and walked away. She tried to focus on her practice. She went to the Belmont Theater every day after classes. She sat at the old piano and played for hours, but the doubts were starting to creep in. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was making a mistake. Maybe she should just ask for a transfer like everyone else had done. One evening, she was practicing alone in the theater when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Professor Hendricks standing in the aisle. He was the head of the piano department, a man in his 60s with a stern face and a reputation for being hard to impress. He had taught some of the most successful pianists in the country. His opinion mattered. Clara stopped playing and stood up. Her heart was beating fast. Professor Hendricks walked slowly toward the stage. He looked at the piano with an expression she could not read. Then he looked at her. "I heard you refused to transfer," he said. His voice was flat, not angry, but not warm either. "Yes, sir," Clara said. He nodded slowly. "Do you know what people are saying about you?" Clara swallowed. "I have heard some of it." "They think you are foolish," he said. "They think you are throwing away your chance. This showcase is important. The people who come to watch can change your future, and you want to perform on a piano that has not been tuned properly in years, a piano that most professionals would refuse to touch." Clara did not know what to say. She stood there, waiting. Professor Hendricks climbed the steps to the stage. He walked over to the piano and ran his hand along the edge of it. His fingers left trails in the thin layer of dust. "I have been teaching for 35 years, he said. "I have seen students with more talent than they knew what to do with. I have seen students with no talent at all who worked harder than anyone else. And I have seen students who had everything handed to them and still failed because they never learned what it means to struggle." He paused and looked at Clara. "Which one are you?" Clara took a breath. "I do not know yet," she said honestly. "But I know I am not ready to give up." Professor Hendricks studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. "I am not going to tell you what to do," he said. "You are an adult. You can make your own choices. But I want you to understand something. The scouts who come to these showcases are not looking for excuses. They do not care that your piano was old. They do not care that the theater was not fancy. They only care about what they hear. And if what they hear is not good enough, that is all they will remember." He turned and walked back toward the aisle. At the edge of the stage, he stopped. "If you are going to do this," he said without looking back, "you had better be sure. Because once you walk onto that stage, there are no second chances." Then he left. The theater doors closed behind him with a heavy sound that echoed through the empty space. Clara stood alone on the stage for a long time. The professor's words played over and over in her head. He had not told her to quit, but he had not encouraged her either. He had simply told her the truth, and the truth was hard to hear. She sat back down at the piano. She placed her fingers on the keys but did not play. She just sat there, feeling the cool ivory under her fingertips, listening to the silence of the old theater. What was she doing? Why was she fighting so hard for this? Everyone thought she was crazy. Maybe she was. She closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother. She thought about all those weekends in that small apartment, learning to play on a piano that was held together by love and stubbornness. She thought about the way her grandmother used to say that music was not about perfection. It was about connection. It was about making someone feel something they could not put into words. Her grandmother's piano had not been perfect. It had been old and worn and out of tune, but it had been real. And when Clara played it, something magical happened. The music came alive in a way that she had never been able to recreate on the fancy pianos at the conservatory. She opened her eyes and looked at the piano in front of her. It was old. It was neglected. It was everything that the music world said a piano should not be. But when Clara pressed a key and let the sound fill the empty theater, she heard something that no one else seemed to hear. She heard a voice that had been silent for too long, a voice that was waiting for someone to listen. She made her decision then. She would not transfer. She would not give up. She would not let the laughter and the whispers and the doubts take this away from her. She would perform on this piano, and she would show them all what it could do. The road ahead would not be easy. She knew that. The students would keep laughing. The professors would keep doubting. The odds would stay stacked against her. But Clara had grown up with odds stacked against her. She had learned to play on a piano that everyone else would have thrown away. She had earned her place at this school when no one expected her to succeed. This was just one more battle, one more moment where the world told her she was not good enough. She was used to that by now, and she had learned something important along the way. Sometimes the things that everyone else gives up on are the things most worth fighting for. Clara began going to the Belmont Theater every night. She would finish her classes, grab something small to eat, and take the bus downtown. By the time she arrived, the sun was usually setting. The old building looked even more lonely in the fading light. But Clara did not mind. She liked the quiet. She liked being alone with the piano. The first few nights were frustrating. She would sit down and try to play her usual pieces, the ones she had practiced 100 times on the conservatory's perfect pianos. But they did not sound right. The notes came out uneven. Some keys were louder than others. Some had a strange buzzing sound underneath. The pedals felt different, heavier somehow. Everything she thought she knew about playing seemed to fall apart. She wanted to scream. She wanted to slam the lid shut and walk away. But she did not. Instead, she took a deep breath and did something she had never done before. She stopped trying to play the piano, and she started trying to listen to it. She pressed one key at a time, just one. She would hold it down and let the sound hang in the air until it faded completely. Then she would press another. She listened to how each note sounded. She noticed which ones were bright and clear. She noticed which ones were softer, almost like they were hiding. She noticed that some keys had a warmth to them, a richness that surprised her. It took her 3 nights just to go through all 88 keys this way. By the end, she had a map in her head. She knew this piano now. She knew its strengths and its weaknesses. She knew where it struggled and where it shined. Most people would have seen the weaknesses as problems. Clara saw them as possibilities. She started experimenting. She found that if she played certain notes more gently, they blended better with the ones around them. She found that the bass notes, the low ones on the left side, had a deep rumble that modern pianos often lacked. It was like thunder rolling in the distance. She found that the high notes, though not as crisp as she was used to, had a sweetness to them. They sounded almost like a human voice singing softly. The piano was not broken. It was just different. It had its own personality, its own way of speaking. And once Clara understood that, everything changed. She called her grandmother one night after practice. It was late, almost 11 o'clock, but her grandmother was always awake. She said old people did not need much sleep. Clara thought maybe she just liked the quiet of the night, the same way Clara did. "I do not know if I can do this," Clara admitted. She was sitting on the steps outside the theater, looking up at the stars. Everyone thinks I am making a mistake. Maybe they are right. Her grandmother was quiet for a moment. Clara could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Then she spoke. Do you remember what I told you when you were little? About old pianos? Clara smiled. You said they have stories inside them. That is right, her grandmother said. New pianos are like blank pages. They will play whatever you tell them to play. But old pianos have lived. They have heard music that we will never hear. They have felt hands that are no longer here. All of that stays inside them, in the wood, in the strings. And if you are patient, if you are willing to listen, they will share those stories with you. Clara felt tears forming in her eyes. She blinked them away. But what if I fail? She whispered. Then you fail, her grandmother said simply. But at least you will fail doing something that matters to you. That is better than succeeding at something that means nothing. Clara sat with those words for a long time after they hung up. Her grandmother had always known how to say the things she needed to hear. It was a gift. The next day, Clara made a decision about her piece. She had been planning to play something safe, something she knew well, something that would show off her technique without taking too many risks. But that did not feel right anymore. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it fully. She was going to choose a piece that matched the piano. Something with depth, something with emotion, something that could breathe. She chose Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire. It was also one of the most beautiful. It started quietly, almost hesitantly, like someone trying to find the courage to speak. Then it built slowly, layer by layer, until it exploded into moments of incredible power and passion. And woven through it all was a thread of sadness, a longing for something that could never quite be reached. It was risky. Many students avoided the Chopin ballades because they were so demanding. One small mistake could ruin everything. But Clara knew this piece. She had been playing it since she was 15, learning it note by note on her grandmother's old upright. And she knew somehow that the Belmont piano would understand it too. She began practicing the ballade every night. She did not just play the notes, she shaped them. She adjusted her touch for each passage, finding the right pressure, the right speed, the right amount of feeling. Some sections needed to be lighter than she was used to. Others needed more weight. The piano taught her as much as she taught it. There were moments of magic. One night she played the opening passage and something clicked. The notes floated up into the dark theater and hung there like ghosts. She felt shivers run down her spine. This was it. This was the sound she had been searching for. But there were also moments of doubt. Some nights nothing worked. The piano seemed stubborn, unwilling to cooperate. Clara would leave feeling frustrated and exhausted, wondering if she was wasting her time. She kept going anyway, night after night, week after week. The other students at the conservatory noticed that she was always gone in the evenings. Some of them made jokes about it. One girl asked her if she was having a secret romance with the old piano. Clara just smiled and said nothing. Let them laugh. Let them think whatever they wanted. She knew what she was doing, even if no one else did. 3 weeks before the showcase, something shifted. Clara sat down at the piano and played the entire ballade from beginning to end without stopping. And when she finished, she realized she was crying. Not from sadness, from joy. The music had moved through her in a way it never had before. She had not just played the piece, she had lived it. The piano had given her everything. Every note, every phrase, every moment of beauty. It had trusted her with its voice, and she had learned how to set it free. She wiped her eyes and laughed softly to herself. She probably looked crazy, sitting alone in an empty theater, crying over a piano that everyone else thought was worthless. But she did not care. She finally understood something important. This was not about proving the other students wrong. It was not about impressing the scouts or the professors. It was not even about winning. It was about the music. It was about the connection between her and this instrument. It was about honoring something that had been forgotten and giving it a chance to be heard again. The showcase was still weeks away. But Clara felt ready. Not because she was confident she would succeed. She was not sure of anything, but she was ready to try, ready to step onto that stage and share what she and the piano had built together. Whatever happened after that was out of her hands. All she could do was play and hope that someone out there was willing to listen. The night of the showcase arrived faster than Clara expected. One moment she was counting down the weeks, then the days, then the hours, and suddenly it was here. She woke up that morning with a knot in her stomach. She tried to eat breakfast but could only manage a few bites of toast. Her hands were trembling slightly. She told herself it was just nerves. Every performer got nervous. It was normal. But knowing that did not make it feel any better. She spent the day trying to stay calm. She went for a walk around campus. She sat by the fountain and watched the water. She tried to read a book but could not focus on the words. Her mind kept drifting to the evening ahead. At 4 o'clock, she went back to her small dorm room and started getting ready. She had bought a simple black dress for the occasion. It was not expensive or fancy, but it fit her well and made her feel like a real performer. She put on the small silver earrings her grandmother had given her for her 18th birthday. She looked at herself in the mirror and took a deep breath. "You can do this," she told herself. "You have done everything you can. Now you just have to trust yourself." The bus ride downtown felt longer than usual. Clara sat by the window and watched the city pass by. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful. She tried to let the beauty calm her nerves. When she arrived at the Belmont Theater, the street was quiet. There were no crowds gathering outside. No fancy cars dropping off important guests. The main showcase at the conservatory was where all the attention was tonight. The Belmont show was an afterthought, a place for the students who did not matter. Clara walked up to the entrance and pushed open the heavy doors. Inside, a few staff members were setting up chairs and adjusting the lighting. One of them nodded at her as she walked past. She made her way backstage and found a small room where she could wait until it was her turn. There were 2 other students performing at Belmont that night. Both of them were underclassmen who had not been able to get transfers. They looked as nervous as Clara felt. One of them, a young woman with short hair, was pacing back and forth. The other, a tall young man with glasses, was sitting in the corner with his eyes closed, moving his fingers in the air like he was playing an invisible piano. Clara found a chair and sat down. She could hear the audience starting to arrive. The sounds of footsteps and quiet conversations drifted through the walls. She wondered how many people were out there. Probably not many. Most of the donors and scouts would be at the main campus, watching the star students perform on perfect pianos in a perfect concert hall. That was fine. Clara did not need a big audience. She just needed people who were willing to listen. The showcase began at 7 o'clock. The young man with glasses performed first. He played a piece by Beethoven. Clara listened from backstage. He was good. His technique was solid, but she could hear the nerves in his playing. Some of the notes were rushed, some were too careful. The old piano did not help. It seemed to resist him, like it could sense his fear. When he finished, there was polite applause. Not enthusiastic, but respectful. He came backstage looking relieved that it was over. The young woman with short hair went next. She played a piece by Debussy. Her style was different, more fluid and expressive. She handled the piano better than the first student had. The music floated through the theater like water. When she finished, the applause was a little warmer. Then it was Clara's turn. She stood up and smoothed down her dress. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her hands were cold. She flexed her fingers, trying to get the blood flowing. A staff member opened the door and nodded at her. It was time. Clara walked down the short hallway that led to the stage. Each step felt heavy. She could see the light at the end, the glow of the stage lights spilling into the darkness. She could hear the murmur of the audience, the soft rustling of programs, the occasional cough. She stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright. For a moment, she could not see the audience. They were just shadows beyond the glare. But as her eyes adjusted, she began to make out faces. There were maybe 60 or 70 people in the seats. Not many, but more than she had expected. She saw a few professors from the conservatory scattered throughout the rows. She saw some older men and women who looked like they might be donors or music professionals. In the back row, she noticed a man in a dark suit writing something in a notebook. A scout, maybe, or a critic. She walked to the piano. The old grand sat there waiting for her, its dark surface glowing softly under the lights. She ran her hand along the edge of it, a small greeting. Then she sat down on the bench. The theater fell silent. Clara placed her fingers on the keys. They were cool and smooth, familiar now. She had touched these keys hundreds of times over the past weeks. She knew every chip, every imperfection. She knew exactly how they would respond. She closed her eyes and took one slow breath. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about all those years learning on the old upright in the cramped apartment. She thought about every person who had ever told her she was not good enough. Then she let it all go. All the doubt, all the fear, all the noise. There was only her, and the piano, and the music waiting to be born. She began to play. The first notes of Chopin's ballade. Number 1 floated into the silence. They were soft, almost hesitant. A question being asked, a story beginning to unfold. Clara let the notes breathe. She did not rush. She let each one hang in the air before moving to the next. She heard a small sound from the audience, a shifting, a leaning forward. She did not look up. She kept her eyes on the keys, her mind on the music. The piece began to build. The melody grew stronger, more confident. Clara felt the piano responding to her. It was not fighting her anymore. It was singing. The deep bass notes rumbled like distant thunder. The high notes sparkled like stars. The old wood and old strings came alive under her fingers. She reached the first climax of the piece. Her hands flew across the keys. The music poured out of the piano, filling the theater, bouncing off the walls, wrapping around every person in the audience. It was powerful. It was raw. It was everything Clara had been holding inside for weeks, for years, for her entire life. Then she pulled back. The music softened. The storm passed. What remained was something tender, a melody that ached with longing. Clara played it like a prayer, like a goodbye, like a love letter to someone who would never read it. She could feel tears forming in her eyes, but she did not stop. She let them come. This was not about being perfect. It was about being real. The piece built again, higher, faster, more intense. Clara's fingers danced across the keys. She was not thinking anymore. She was not planning. She was just feeling. The music moved through her like electricity. And then came the final passage, the thundering chords, the cascading notes. The explosion of sound that Chopin had written almost 200 years ago. Clara played it with everything she had. Her whole body was involved now, her arms, her shoulders, her breath. She and the piano were one. The last chord rang out. It hung in the air, vibrating, alive. Then silence. Clara lifted her hands from the keys. She sat very still. She was breathing hard. Her heart was racing. Her cheeks were wet with tears she did not remember crying. For a moment, nothing happened. The theater was completely quiet. Clara felt a flash of fear. Had she failed? Had they hated it? Was it all for nothing? Then someone in the audience started clapping, and then another person, and another, and suddenly The whole theater was applauding. People were rising from their seats. The sound grew louder and louder until it filled the entire space. Clara looked up. Through her tears, she saw them, 60 or 70 people on their feet, clapping. Some of them were wiping their eyes. Some of them were smiling. The man in the back row with the notebook had stopped writing. He was just staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. She had done it. She and the old piano had done it together. The applause seemed to go on forever. Clara sat at the piano, her hands resting in her lap, her heart still racing. She did not know what to do. She had imagined this moment so many times. But now that it was happening, she felt frozen. Finally, she remembered to stand. Her legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. She turned to face the audience and gave a small bow. The clapping grew even louder. Someone in the front row called out, "Bravo!" Others joined in. The sound washed over her like a wave. She walked off stage in a daze. The other two students were waiting in the wings. The young woman with short hair grabbed her arm and said something, but Clara could barely hear the words. Everything felt distant, like she was watching herself from far away. She made it back to the small waiting room and sat down heavily in a chair. Her hands were shaking. She looked at them and laughed softly. She had done it. She had actually done it. A few minutes later, the showcase ended. The audience began to leave. Clara could hear their voices drifting through the walls, animated and excited. She caught fragments of conversations. Words like "incredible" and "that girl" and "did you hear that piano?" There was a knock on the door. A staff member poked his head in and said there were some people who wanted to meet her. Clara stood up, smoothed her dress, and followed him out. In the lobby, a small group had gathered. Clara recognized a few of the professors from the conservatory. They looked different than usual. The stern expressions she was used to seeing were gone. Instead, they looked surprised, almost impressed. Professor Hendricks was there too, the head of the piano department, the man who had warned her about throwing away her chance. He walked up to her and stopped. For a moment, he just looked at her. Then he nodded slowly. "I was wrong about you," he said. His voice was quiet, meant only for her. "That was one of the finest performances I have heard in 20 years. Clara did not know what to say. She managed a small "thank you" before he moved aside. Behind him stood the man in the dark suit, the one who had been writing in his notebook. Up close, he looked older than she had thought, maybe 60. He had kind eyes and a serious face. "My name is Bernard," he said, extending his hand. "I am a talent scout for the Vienna International Piano Competition. I was not planning to come tonight. I was supposed to be at the main showcase, but a colleague told me there was a student here performing on an old piano who refused to give up. I was curious." Clara shook his hand. Her mind was spinning. "I have heard many pianists in my career," Bernard continued. "Young ones, old ones, famous ones, most of them play the notes. Some of them play the music, but very few of them play the soul." He paused. "Tonight, you played the soul." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. "The Vienna competition is next spring. I would like you to apply. I cannot promise anything, but I believe you have a real chance." Clara took the card. Her hands were trembling again. She looked at the elegant print, the gold lettering. This was real. This was actually happening. "Thank you," she whispered. It was all she could manage. Bernard smiled. "Thank the piano," he said. "It chose well." The crowd eventually thinned out. Clara found herself alone in the lobby, holding the card, still trying to process everything. She walked back into the theater. The lights had been dimmed, but she could still see the stage. The old piano sat there in the shadows, silent now. She climbed the steps and walked over to it. She ran her fingers along the keys one more time. They were still warm from her playing. "Thank you," she said softly. She felt a little silly talking to a piano, but it also felt right. She pulled out her phone and called her grandmother. It was late, almost 10 o'clock, but she knew her grandmother would be waiting. The phone rang twice before she answered. "How did it go?" her grandmother asked. Her voice was calm, but Clara could hear the worry underneath. Clara tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Tears started flowing again, happy tears this time. "Clara? Are you there? What happened?" "I did it, Grandma," Clara finally managed. "They loved it. They stood up. A scout from Vienna gave me his card. He said I played the soul." There was silence on the other end. Then Clara heard her grandmother crying too. "I knew it," she said through her tears. "I knew you could do it. I am so proud of you. Your grandfather would be so proud of you." They talked for almost an hour. Clara told her everything. The nerves, the fear, the moment when the music took over. Her grandmother listened and laughed and cried. By the end, Clara felt lighter than she had in months. Before they hung up, her grandmother said something Clara would never forget. "You gave that piano its voice back," she said. "It had been silent for so long, forgotten. But you listened to it when no one else would. You believed in it. That is a gift, Clara. Never forget that." The weeks that followed were strange. Word spread quickly about what had happened at the Belmont Theater. Students who had mocked Clara now looked at her differently. Some of them even apologized. The young man with the expensive watch, the one who had laughed the loudest, found her in the hallway one day. He did not say much, just a quiet, "I was wrong about you," before walking away. Clara did not hold grudges. She accepted the apologies and moved on. She had bigger things to focus on. She applied to the Vienna competition, just as Bernard had suggested. The application process was long and difficult. She had to submit recordings, write essays, get recommendations, but she did it all. And when the acceptance letter arrived a few months later, she cried again. She was getting used to crying happy tears. But before all of that, something else happened. Something that meant even more to Clara than the competition. A few weeks after the showcase, she received a letter from the Belmont Theater. A donor, someone who had been in the audience that night, had given money to restore the old piano. They wanted to bring it back to its full glory. New strings, proper tuning, repairs to the wooden case, everything it needed. And at the bottom of the letter, there was a note. The donor wished to remain anonymous, but they had requested that a small plaque be placed on the side of the piano once the restoration was complete. The plaque would read, "Every instrument has a voice. Every voice deserves to be heard." Clara visited the theater the day the plaque was installed. She stood in front of the piano and read those words over and over. She thought about all the people who had walked past this instrument for years without giving it a second glance. She thought about all the students who had refused to play it because it was not good enough. And she thought about herself. A girl from a poor family who had learned to play on a worn-out upright in her grandmother's apartment. A girl who had been told she did not belong. A girl who had chosen to believe in something everyone else had given up on. She won the Vienna competition the following year. It was the biggest moment of her career. Newspapers wrote about her. Famous musicians praised her. Offers came from all over the world. But when people asked her about her most important performance, she never talked about Vienna. She talked about a forgotten theater downtown, an old piano that no one wanted, and a night when she learned that sometimes the things the world throws away are the things most worth saving. She still visits the Belmont Theater whenever she can. The piano has been restored now. It sounds beautiful. Other students play it, young musicians just starting their journeys. And every time Clara hears it, she smiles. Because she knows the truth. That piano saved her just as much as she saved it. They found each other at the right moment. Two forgotten voices finally heard, and that made all the difference.